Hey, Patrick here. Today we will tackle stories where people became an unfortunate fatality in amusement parks. From a woman who fell off a boat ride after it tipped over to a ride operator that overrode a gondola.
It was October 19th, 2019, in Santa Rosa, California. A fast-moving wildfire driven by strong Diablo winds had broken out in the hills northeast of the city the previous evening. By early morning, mandatory evacuation orders had been issued for several neighborhoods. Patricia Wentz, 57, was a retired school administrator who had lived in her home for 14 years. She had lived through 2 previous fire seasons without evacuating and viewed the alerts as overly broad. When the evacuation notice sounded and a county deputy knocked, she answered with visible irritation. She questioned whether the order applied specifically to her address and pointed toward the hills, noting that the smoke did not appear to be moving in her direction. She referenced her property taxes while challenging the necessity of leaving. The deputy repeated that the order was mandatory and conditions could shift quickly with the wind. Patricia indicated she would remain and manage the situation herself. The deputy documented her refusal and moved on to the next house. Patricia spent the next 2 hours managing the situation on her own terms. She packed a small bag with documents and her laptop, placing it near the front door as if to demonstrate she was prepared. She ran a garden hose along the east side of the house in an attempt to wet the lawn and siding. She called her sister in Sacramento and described the situation in controlled, measured terms. Her sister urged her to leave. Patricia said the wind had shifted and the smoke looked farther away. Despite that, conditions remained volatile. Late that morning, wind gusts of 45 to 60 miles per hour drove the fire line more than a mile in under 30 minutes. Embers carried well ahead of the primary front, ignited spot fires on rooftops and dry grass lots throughout the neighborhood. One ember lodged in an attic vent 2 houses down. Another caught her backyard fence. Patricia called 911 minutes later and reported that a structure across the street was burning. The dispatcher told her to leave immediately. Fire units were occupied with multiple structures. She moved toward the garage where her car was parked. The electric opener was dead, likely due to a power outage in the area. The smoke thickened rapidly inside the garage, reducing visibility to only a few feet. She reached for the manual release, but the air had already grown intensely hot and difficult to breathe. She became disoriented within minutes and collapsed near the doorway. She was found by firefighters inside the garage doorway during a secondary search after the main fire front had passed through the neighborhood. She was transported by ambulance to the hospital and pronounced dead later that afternoon. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as smoke inhalation with thermal injuries. In the months that followed, authorities expanded early evacuation messaging and increased door-to-door notification efforts in high-risk wind events. It was July 19, 2017, and afternoon heat shimmered above the asphalt pathways of a regional amusement park outside Columbus, Ohio. The air smelled of fried dough and chlorine from nearby water attractions as families moved between rides under a cloudless sky. Recorded temperatures that afternoon reached 94 degrees, with humidity adding to the oppressive conditions. Darnell Wickham, 27, worked as a personal fitness trainer at a chain gym, specializing in high-intensity programs and promoting his brand on social media. Standing 6'2" and weighing 185 pounds, he projected an image of physical strength and fearlessness. Friends described him as focused on content creation, often filming workouts and stunts in public to grow his following. That afternoon, Darnell visited the park with 3 friends to film material for his fitness channel. He had announced plans to create an extreme amusement park content and brought a phone in a waterproof case with a wrist strap. The group sought rides, offering dramatic visual, and around 3 p.m., joined the line for a log flume attraction operating since the early 1990s. The ride followed a winding water channel, ending in a steep 52-foot drop at a 45-degree angle, sending fiberglass boats through a splash zone before entering a final canal. Posted regulations and automated announcements required riders to remain seated with hands inside the boat, and attendants repeated these instructions before dispatch. Darnell and his friends boarded a 6-person boat, with Darnell taking the front seat for a clear camera angle. Witnesses later said he planned to stand during the climb to film the descent. Despite friends' concerns, the staff was not alerted as the boat began its ascent. As the boat climbed, Darnell shifted his position and began to stand, gripping the boat's sides while raising his phone. The boat's design featured smooth interior walls with minimal handhold, and its rounded bottom made balance precarious even under stable conditions. Friends later told investigators they saw him fully upright approximately 3/4 of the way up the lift, holding his phone extended ahead of him to capture the approaching drop. The boat crested the lift hill and transitioned onto the drop track. The sudden shift in angle as the boat tipped into the descent caused Darnell to lose his balance immediately. His feet slipped on the wet fiberglass surface as his center of gravity pitched forward. He grabbed for the boat's front edge, attempting to regain stability, but his momentum carried him over the forward lip as the boat accelerated down the flume. Witnesses in boats behind observed Darnell separate from the vessel approximately 15 feet into the drop. His body struck the concrete flume channel and tumbled violently down the remaining descent, impacting the walls multiple times before reaching the splash pool at the bottom. The force of the impacts was visible to riders approaching from behind and to guests standing in the viewing area adjacent to the ride's finale. Ride operators initiated emergency shutdown procedures within seconds. First responders reached Darnell within minutes. He was lying face down in the shallow water at the base of the flume, unconscious and unresponsive. He was transported to a regional trauma center where medical teams worked for over an hour to stabilize him. He was pronounced dead that evening. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be severe traumatic brain injury with skull and cervical spine fractures. Investigators reviewed his phone footage, which clearly documented his decision to stand. No equipment malfunction was identified. Darnell's family later settled with the park's insurance carrier.
It was September 8, 2015, and dry winter heat hung over a drive-through wildlife theme park in Limpopo Province, South Africa, where a gravel road wound through several kilometers of fenced enclosures separated by double-gated vehicle airlocks. Signage at the entrance warned visitors in 4 languages to remain inside vehicles at all times. Jantine Kelderhuis was 55 years old and had retired the previous year after 3 decades teaching primary school in a small town outside Utrecht in the Netherlands. She was on a bucket list trip to South Africa with her longtime travel companion Marika, a retired nurse. The two had been planning the trip since before either of them retired, saving together, researching routes, pinning photographs to a corkboard in Marika's kitchen. Jantine's daughter later told investigators her mother had talked about seeing African wildlife in person for as long as she could remember. When I read that it was her lifelong dream, I already felt sick about where this was heading. From what I gathered, apparently that morning, they rented a car from a budget agency near the park, a manual transmission sedan standard in South African rental fleets. At the park entrance, a gate attendant delivered a verbal safety briefing in English and handed them a laminated instruction card. The first rule clearly read to not exit the vehicle under any circumstances. Marika later told investigators she placed the card on the dashboard. By the time they entered the large cat enclosure, it had slid onto the passenger seat. "I want you to hold on to that detail. The card was right there the entire time." Marika later described the 20 minutes before the incident in detail. The rental car's air conditioning had stopped working shortly after they entered the park. Jantine, driving, had been complaining steadily for 10 minutes, fanning herself with the folded park map, saying she couldn't breathe in the heat. She tried to crack the window. Marika reminded her of the rules. Jantine rolled it back up, but her agitation kept building. She shifted in her seat, tugged at her shirt collar, fanned harder. When the car stalled, Jantine had let the clutch out too fast while creeping at low speed. She turned the key twice. The engine didn't catch, likely flooded from the low-speed stalling. She slapped the steering wheel with both palms. From everything I've read, she was already past the point of listening to anyone. Marika told investigators she said Jantine's name firmly and pointed at the instruction card on the passenger seat. Jantine didn't look at it. She didn't look at Marika. She opened the driver's side door, stepped out onto the gravel, walked several paces toward the center of the road, and began waving both arms at the vehicle behind her. The vehicle behind, a family in an SUV, later told park officials they saw the woman exit and immediately began honking their horn, her companions screaming, signs everywhere. I genuinely don't understand how she still walked out. A lioness that had been resting in tall grass roughly 30 feet from the road, invisible from inside the car, rose at the movement. The upright human figure, arms waving, triggered a pursuit response. The cat approached at a fast walk that accelerated into a sprint over the final 15 feet. Marika later described roughly 5 to 8 seconds between Jantine stepping out and the attack, long enough for Marika to scream a warning through the open door, not long enough for Jantine to turn, process it, and get back inside. The lioness struck from behind, targeting her neck and the base of her skull. Jantine went down immediately. Marika pulled the driver's side door shut from the passenger seat. Rangers reached the scene within 3 minutes using vehicle positioning and noise deterrents to drive the lioness back. Jantine was unresponsive. Emergency staff pronounced her dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined hemorrhagic shock from deep lacerations severing the carotid artery and jugular vein with puncture wounds consistent with large felid bite force. The park revised vehicle protocols and began offering automatic transmission rentals as default. Emergency call buttons were installed throughout the enclosure. The laminated instruction card was entered as evidence. Marika flew home to the Netherlands alone 3 days later. That last detail is the one I can't let go of. 3 days alone in a foreign country after watching that happen.
It was August 14th, 2014. The evening air at a small seaside amusement park in Kent, England, carried the smell of fried food and salt water as final closing announcements echoed across empty walkways. Lewis Carter, a 21-year-old bricklayer's apprentice, stood near the darkened Ferris wheel with 3 friends, his judgment clouded by an evening of heavy drinking at nearby pubs. Lewis worked for a local construction company. Co-workers described him as competent on job sites, but reckless on weekends, frequently drinking heavily and accepting dares that demonstrated poor judgment. He'd grown up in the coastal town, familiar with the small amusement park since childhood. The Ferris wheel stood 45 feet tall with 12 enclosed cabins, each rotating on a central axle driven by an electric motor and gearbox with a fail-safe brake. The ride operated with exposed steel bracing between cabins and a guarded central hub, housing accessible from the exterior framework during maintenance. Access ladders ran along the exterior framework for maintenance purposes, terminating at a small service platform, roughly 25 feet above ground, normally secured behind locked gates. That evening, Lewis and his friends had been drinking since late afternoon, consuming multiple pints before arriving at the park just before closing. Staff had made final announcements at 9:45 in the evening, clearing remaining guests from attractions. After the park closed, Lewis and his friends climbed a locked perimeter fence along the darkened seafront boundary to get back inside. They later admitted they'd been joking about climbing the Ferris wheel when they noticed a short maintenance gate at the base of the ride had been left unsecured. The dare became real. His friends challenged him directly. Lewis approached the unsecured maintenance gate while his friends watched from 20 feet away. He gripped the exterior maintenance ladder running along the wheel's framework, beginning his climb as the structure remained stationary. The ride operator, conducting post-closing safety checks in the control booth, assumed all guests had exited and never noticed movement on the darkened attraction. Lewis climbed steadily upward, reaching approximately 25 feet when his friends heard the low whine of the electric drive engaging. The operator had initiated a routine post-closing rotation test. Unbeknownst to the operator, a maintenance gate interlock in the ride's safety permissive circuit had been temporarily bypassed during an earlier repair, allowing the system to register the ride as secure. The massive wheel began turning slowly, cabins shifting position as the entire structure moved. Lewis, clinging to the exterior ladder, suddenly found himself moving backward through space as the ladder and rungs began to move tangentially with the wheel's rotation, his footing shifting on the damp metal. His friends shouted warnings, but the operator couldn't hear them over machinery noise and distance. Lewis's hands slipped from the wet metal rungs. He fell backward through the gap between two cabins, spaced roughly 10 feet apart. His body struck a diagonal steel cross brace connecting the framework, the impact spinning him violently before he dropped further. He collided with the exposed central hub housing, a solid steel structure nearly 3 feet across, striking it with devastating force before falling the remaining distance to the concrete platform below. His friends watched the entire sequence unfold in approximately 4 seconds. One friend immediately called emergency services, while another ran screaming toward the control booth. The operator struck the emergency stop, and the wheel took nearly 20 seconds to bleed off rotational energy before coming to a halt. Paramedics arrived within 9 minutes and found Lewis unresponsive on the platform in a spreading pool of blood. Resuscitation attempts failed, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner's inquest recorded the death as misadventure caused by blunt force trauma with cardiac rupture and massive internal hemorrhage, and his blood alcohol level was well above the legal driving limit. His 3 friends provided detailed statements to investigators, describing the dare and their failure to stop him. The amusement park funded immediate upgrades to perimeter gates, lock mechanisms, and interlock systems across all rides.
It was September 2nd, 2016. The residential streets of Leeds, England, sat quiet under uneven streetlight as Derek Anselmo and 4 friends gathered at the top of Moorland Hill with a stolen shopping cart. Derek was 29 years old and worked sporadically as a temporary delivery driver for a regional logistics company. Between shifts, he spent most evenings drinking with the same group of friends who had known him since secondary school. Over the past year, Derek had developed a pattern of increasingly reckless stunts after drinking, posting shaky footage to social media that rarely got more than a few dozen views. Friends described him as attention-seeking but ultimately harmless, someone who never quite grew out of teenage behavior. Shopping cart riding involves sitting inside a standard metal grocery cart, while others push it down steep inclines, reaching speeds that can exceed 30 miles per hour with no braking system, steering mechanism, or protective equipment. The carts weigh approximately 40 pounds of rigid steel frame with small plastic wheels designed for flat supermarket floors, not uneven asphalt. Derek had attempted similar stunts on gentler slopes without incident, which likely gave him misplaced confidence. That evening, Derek had consumed roughly 8 pints at a local pub before suggesting they steal a cart from a nearby supermarket parking lot. His friends agreed, despite obvious intoxication. Moorland Hill was a residential street with a 12.8-degree gradient, dropping approximately 300 feet over a quarter mile. The road surface was poorly maintained, with multiple potholes and uneven patches. Streetlights created pools of visibility separated by long stretches of shadow. At approximately 11:40 at night, Derek climbed into the cart while 2 friends positioned themselves behind to push. No one checked the route beforehand or considered the road conditions. A neighbor later reported hearing loud laughter and shouting before the group began their descent. The initial push sent Derek accelerating rapidly down the hill. His friends ran behind for about 50 feet before losing pace. The cart picked up speed through the first intersection, wobbling violently but staying upright. Derek was laughing and shouting as streetlight reflections flashed across the metal frame. At approximately 28 miles per hour, the front wheels struck a pothole, jamming one caster and pitching the cart violently forward. The impact was instantaneous and catastrophic. Derek's body continued at full velocity while the cart pivoted forward. His forehead struck the concrete curb edge with tremendous force, creating skull fractures and dislocations, injuries incompatible with life. The cart slammed onto his upper body, and the violent rotation produced catastrophic neck and skull injuries. Witnesses running behind saw Derek's head rebound slightly from the curb before the cart completed its flip. Blood began pooling immediately around his head, spreading rapidly across the pavement. One friend called emergency services, reporting someone had fallen from a shopping cart. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes, but paramedics declared Derek deceased at the scene after confirming catastrophic trauma. Police cordoned the site, photographed and collected the cart as evidence, and released the area after initial forensics. Derek's friends initially scattered from the scene, but returned to police within hours. Investigators reviewed CCTV footage and statements and found no grounds for prosecution. Moreland Hill's surface was quietly resurfaced 7 months later, following multiple resident complaints about road conditions, though officials never publicly connected the repairs to Derek's death.
It was June 28, 2018, in Tucson, Arizona. By midday, the temperature had reached 104 degrees, and desert wildlife was active. Longtime residents knew that rattlesnakes moved through the subdivision walls and drainage corridors during the summer, and that the safest response was distance. Roxanne Gillis, 46, had lived in the neighborhood for 3 years and served on the Homeowners Association board. She was known for escalating minor issues to city departments and demanding immediate corrective action. Over the previous year, she had contacted animal control twice about snakes near the common area, insisting they be removed. Each time she was informed that snakes on private or undeveloped land were not under city jurisdiction, and that residents were advised to leave them alone. She viewed those explanations as inadequate and dismissive. In the weeks leading up to the incident, she had also raised concerns during HOA discussions about reducing spending on outside contractors, including wildlife relocation services. That afternoon, during her usual midday walk, a neighbor spotted a diamondback rattlesnake coiled at the base of a block wall along a shared pathway. The neighbor stepped back and began calling a licensed wildlife relocator. Roxanne arrived moments later and pushed past the small cluster of neighbors to get a clearer look. Despite being told repeatedly to stay back, she stepped closer to the wall and leaned forward, studying the snake with the same measured focus she used during Homeowners Association inspections. She waved off the suggestion to wait for a professional and positioned herself between the snake and the others, effectively taking control of the scene. She indicated that she had handled situations like this before and that it did not require outside help. She had no gloves, no tools, and no protective equipment. When someone pointed that out, she crouched anyway, lowering herself to within a few feet of the coiled rattlesnake. The snake remained tight and elevated, its head angled toward her movement. The snake began to rattle as she extended her hand toward its tail. Several neighbors backed away and told her to stop. She hesitated only briefly, then leaned in again and reached closer. The rattlesnake struck forward in a rapid arc and bit her right hand between the thumb and index finger. Roxanne stood abruptly and stepped backward. 2 puncture wounds were immediately visible. The neighbor called 911 without delay. Paramedics arrived approximately 20 minutes later. During transport, her hand began swelling rapidly, and she reported increasing pain and dizziness. At the hospital, physicians administered anti-venom and admitted her to intensive care for monitoring. Laboratory tests revealed significant disruption to her blood's clotting function, a known complication of rattlesnake envenomation. Despite additional antivenom and aggressive supportive treatment, she developed internal bleeding overnight. Her condition deteriorated steadily. Blood pressure levels fell to critical readings, and efforts to stabilize her were unsuccessful. Roxanne Gillis was pronounced dead the following morning. An autopsy determined the cause of death to be complications of rattlesnake envenomation. In the weeks that followed, the Homeowners Association circulated guidance reminding residents not to approach or attempt to relocate wildlife and to contact licensed professionals instead. The neighbor, who had initially called for help, provided a statement confirming that Roxanne had ignored repeated warnings to keep her distance. The snake was later located by a contracted wildlife relocator and removed from the area without further incident. It was August 6, 2016, and heat waves rose from concrete pathways at a water park in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. Afternoon temperatures exceeded 105 degrees as families moved between attractions under a relentless sun. The sound of rushing water and screaming riders echoed across the facility as lifeguards rotated positions to avoid heat exhaustion. Leighton Cardwell, 33, worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative who traveled throughout the Southwest meeting medical practices and hospitals. Colleagues saw him as outgoing and polished, but intensely private. Unknown to them, he had concealed a severe water-related anxiety disorder since childhood, caused by a near-drowning incident at age 7. He avoided pools and beaches and had never learned to swim beyond basic floating in shallow water. That Saturday afternoon, Leighton attended a mandatory corporate team-building event at a water park with about 40 employees. Though he considered declining, he feared his absence might affect upcoming performance evaluations. The group first visited wave pools and a lazy river, where he remained in shallow areas without drawing attention. Around 2 p.m., several colleagues chose a water slide tower with 4 configurations. The facility's design routed 3 of the 4 slides into a shared 9-foot-deep landing pool with no shallow section, and rapid dispatch intervals during peak hour meant riders entered the water in close succession. Leighton's supervisor encouraged everyone to ride together as a bonding activity. When he hesitated, explaining he preferred shallow attractions, colleagues pressured him, and his supervisor insisted on participation. Facing mounting pressure, Leighton agreed without revealing his inability to swim confidently. The group climbed the tower, and Leighton chose a steep body slide designed to drop riders directly into a deep landing pool. After a brief safety check at the dispatch platform, he descended through several turns before a final straightaway that launched riders into the landing pool. Leighton descended the slide as instructed. Multiple witnesses later described seeing him exit the slide and enter the pool, submerging completely beneath the surface before bobbing upward. Instead of swimming toward the pool's edge, he remained in place, his movements becoming erratic and uncoordinated. Lifeguards later reported that he appeared to be struggling within 5 seconds of surfacing. The landing pool was congested, with riders exiting slides in rapid succession, creating challenging visibility conditions for the 2 lifeguards monitoring the space. One lifeguard noticed Leighton's distress approximately 10 seconds after he surfaced and immediately entered the water. By the time the lifeguard reached him, Leighton had submerged again and was no longer visible at the surface. The lifeguard dove repeatedly, locating Leighton on the pool's bottom after approximately 20 seconds. He was pulled to the pool's edge, where additional staff initiated resuscitation efforts immediately. Paramedics arrived within 12 minutes and continued advanced life support, but Leighton did not regain consciousness. He was transported to a nearby hospital, where he was pronounced dead roughly 40 minutes after arrival. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be drowning with associated hypoxic brain injury. Toxicology results showed no alcohol or impairing substances. Investigators later interviewed Leighton's family, who disclosed his long-standing fear of water and inability to swim. His employer faced a wrongful death lawsuit filed by his family, which was settled confidentially. The water park subsequently revised its policies, adding mandatory life jacket availability for deep water slide complexes and increasing lifeguard staffing and surveillance systems at high-traffic landing pools. It was July 14, 2018, and a haze of humidity hung over a mid-size regional theme park in Gyeonggi Province, south of Seoul, South Korea. Families crowded the park's water-adjacent rides to escape the midday heat, and the log flume, one of the park's original attractions, had a queue stretching well past the 30-minute marker. Hwang Soyeon was 37 years old and worked as a dental hygienist at a private clinic in Suwon. She was at the park with 6 colleagues for the clinic's annual summer outing, a tradition organized each year by the office manager. Soyeon had been with the clinic for 9 years, the longest tenured hygienist on staff. Colleagues later described her as the person who always said yes. She covered shifts when others called in sick,
stayed late to help with inventory, reorganized the supply closet without being asked, and never complained about the seating assignments at staff dinners. And that description alone told me this was going to be one of the hardest stories in this video for me. When the group reached the front of the log flume queue, they split into two boats. Soyeon's colleague in the front seat, the newest hire, still visibly nervous about every ride, asked if Soyeon could hold her glasses during the drop. She was worried about them flying off. Soyeon took them without hesitation, folded them carefully, and set them in her lap. She then offered the colleague the outside seat for a better view and moved herself to the inside position. Both decisions placed her in the worst possible configuration, leaning slightly forward with her eyes on the glasses in her lap, seated where she couldn't brace against a sidewall. I need you to understand. She moved seats and took the glasses to be nice. That's where it should have ended. Her hands held the glasses rather than the grab bar, and the ride proceeded normally through the winding water channel, climbing the chain lift to the top of the final drop, roughly 45 feet above the splash pool at the base. The boat tipped over the crest and accelerated down the flume. When I was researching the structure of it, apparently the splash pool was designed to cushion arriving boats. A deep trough of water that allowed the boat to skim the surface and decelerate gradually over distance. A float valve in the pool's recirculation system controlled the water level. The valve had malfunctioned. The water level sat significantly lower than the designed operating depth. When I found that detail in the investigation report, I was already bracing myself. The boat hit the reduced depth pool at full speed. Instead of skimming across a deep cushion of water, the bow dug into the shallow surface. The boat decelerated violently over a very short distance as the front of the boat dug into the shallow water. The force was comparable to a low-speed car crash without a seatbelt. Soyeon, unrestrained and leaning forward, was thrown into the molded fiberglass interior of the bow. Her head struck first. The sound was audible to riders in the queue above the splash pool. Colleagues in outer seats were jolted hard but partially braced against the boat's sidewalls. The colleague in front hit the grab bar across her midsection but stayed in her seat. The boat rocked once and settled in the shallow pool. Water lapped against the sides. Soyeon was slumped in the bow, motionless, with visible trauma to her head and face. The glasses were found on the floor of the boat beside her, still folded. That's the detail I'm going to carry forever from this one. The colleague who had asked her to hold them was the first to reach her. Park staff reached the splash pool within 2 minutes. Soyeon was transported to a regional hospital and pronounced dead. The medical examiner determined fatal cranial fractures and cervical spine injury from high-velocity forward deceleration against a fixed interior surface. Investigation traced the failure to a float valve that had exceeded its service life by 14 months. Replacement had been scheduled twice and deferred both times. The shallow water turned a gradual deceleration into an abrupt stop, multiplying force several times beyond design. The ride was permanently shut down. The park settled with Soyeon's family. Her clinic retired her operatory chair and placed a memorial in the break room. The colleague whose glasses she'd been holding transferred clinics the following month. I don't have anything to say about that. It just breaks me.
It was April 22nd, 2016. The afternoon sun beat down on a sprawling urban theme park in São Paulo, Brazil, where hydraulic launch systems sent steel coasters screaming through loops and inversions. Renato Alves, 41, was recently divorced after 8 years of marriage. He'd thrown himself into work at a major logistics company, supervising overnight teams loading international freight containers. Co-workers described him as reliable but increasingly isolated, spending lunch breaks scrolling through his phone rather than socializing. The hydraulic launch coaster, where Renato queued, operated on a simple but violent principle. A catch car accelerates the train from rest to 62 miles per hour in around 3 seconds, using compressed nitrogen and hydraulic pressure, generating forces between 1.3 and 1.7 G. Riders are pinned against their seats as the train rockets down a steel trough before climbing approximately 180 feet vertically. The launch track sits in a recessed channel barely 3 feet wide, surrounded by low barriers designed only to prevent accidental falls, not deliberate entry. That afternoon, Renato boarded the front row. As the train locked into position, his phone slipped from his pocket, tumbling into the launch trough below. After the operator released all restraints during the standard unload cycle, Renato stepped out and called for staff assistance. A 19-year-old seasonal trainee assisting at the platform, working his second week, told Renato he'd have to wait until closing time for retrieval per park policy, while a certified lead operator controlled dispatch from the console. Renato watched his phone, lying face up on the steel, notifications still lighting the screen. The lead operator cycled the system toward the next launch after Renato exited the platform and moved into the public egress lane. Renato left the loading platform but didn't exit the ride area. Instead, he noticed the low service barrier near the station exit, barely waist-high, designed only to mark the restricted zone. Maintenance logs would later show that the automatic light curtain safety system had been bypassed under a temporary manual override during contractor calibration work after repeated nuisance faults 3 days earlier and never reactivated. Witnesses saw Renato duck under the barrier and lower himself into the launch trough during what he believed was a loading pause. He crouched between the steel guide rails, reaching for his phone. The hydraulic system, already fully pressurized and staged, received its automated launch signal. There was no countdown audible to anyone in the trough. The launch tone sounded. Hydraulic pressure ramped to operational maximum almost instantly, while the train's acceleration profile remained electronically limited. The 24-passenger train, weighing approximately 18 short tons fully loaded, accelerated forward. Renato looked up as the train's aerodynamic nose struck his upper back and right shoulder, driving him sideways into the steel trough wall. His body compressed between the passing train and unyielding metal as every car rolled over him in sequence. The train completed its circuit before load monitoring sensors at the brake run detected abnormal resistance data and triggered a system fault, locking dispatch and alerting operators as the train entered the magnetic brake section. Screaming passengers and ride operators called park security immediately. On-site medical staff arrived and requested municipal emergency services, which arrived within 9 minutes. Protocol prevented anyone from entering the trough until the train was manually moved to a maintenance bay, requiring hydraulic accumulators to be vented, electrical systems locked out, and the train winched clear, a process requiring 23 additional minutes. When responders finally reached Renato, he had suffered catastrophic lower body crush trauma and was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner's report documented multiple rib fractures, severe internal organ destruction, extensive pelvic fragmentation, and traumatic amputation of the left leg above the knee. The investigation revealed disabled safety systems, inadequate barrier height, and absent warning protocols, pending trial from authorities. Renato's ex-wife identified his remains using a wrist tattoo.
It was June 14th, 2014. The afternoon sun beat down on the concrete spillway of a rural hydroelectric dam in eastern Tennessee, where water thundered through open gates into the river below. Rowan Hensley, a 34-year-old warehouse loader from nearby Cookeville, climbed over the chain-link fence despite red warning signs. Rowan worked third shift at a regional distribution center, loading pallets onto trucks for barely above minimum wage. His co-workers described him as restless and attention-seeking, constantly showing off photos from restricted locations he'd visited on his days off. For the past 8 months, he'd been posting increasingly dangerous trespassing shots to a private online group dedicated to urban exploration. His feed showed him standing on active railway bridges, climbing cell towers, and perching on construction crane arms. The validation from the group's 200 members had likely become an obsession. Investigators later obtained server logs and device backups, confirming the posts even after the chat thread was deleted in the aftermath. Dam spillways are among the most dangerous hydraulic structures in existence. When floodgates open, millions of gallons surge through concrete channels designed to dissipate energy through stepped baffles and turbulent pools. The churning water creates powerful hydraulic currents that trap objects in endless recirculation loops. Engineers specifically design spillway faces with rough textures to slow water flow, but recent rainfall had covered the concrete with slick algae growth, creating a nearly frictionless surface. That Saturday, heavy storms upriver had forced dam operators to open 2 gates for flood control, posted signs at every access point, warned of lethal currents, and prohibited entry. According to his online footprint, Rowan had chosen this location specifically because a group member had challenged him to photograph himself at the spillway's edge while water was flowing. Several fishermen downstream later reported seeing him climb the fence around 2:30 in the afternoon and shouted warnings that he ignored completely. Rowan walked across the wet concrete toward the spillway edge, phone extended. The algae coating was worse than it appeared from a distance. He approached within 3 feet of where water disappeared over the edge, his left boot suddenly sliding sideways on the slick surface. His arms windmilled briefly as his body tilted forward. Then he dropped feet first into the torrent. The fisherman watched him strike the angled spillway face 12 feet down, his body ragdolling as the current accelerated him downward. He hit the first concrete baffle with his ribcage. The second baffle caught his legs, spinning him violently. His head struck the third baffle before he disappeared into the churning pool at the base, where whitewater buried him from view. He briefly surfaced 30 feet downstream before being pulled under again. One fisherman immediately called emergency services. A local ambulance and the county swiftwater rescue team arrived 45 minutes after the call, but spent hours waiting for the dam operator to reduce flow in stages before attempting recovery. Nearly 2 hours later, Rowan's body was found partially submerged against a jagged rock outcropping. The medical examiner noted that death resulted from combined shock and hemorrhage, with no single injury being immediately fatal, but the accumulation proving unsurvivable. External abrasions and minor facial lacerations were consistent with impact against concrete baffles. The private group's administrators deleted the entire chat thread within 6 hours of his death, and the community disbanded completely by the following week. A small funeral was held at a local chapel in Cookville, attended mostly by immediate family and a few co-workers.
It was July 22nd, 2017, in Atlanta, Georgia. The Saturday morning traffic on the interstate was moving steadily at approximately 60 miles per hour. A gas station sat just off the exit ramp, separated from the main lanes by a short stretch of service road that fed directly into the merge lane. Michelle Okafor, 44, was a property manager for a residential complex in DeKalb County. People who worked with her described her as someone who found standard procedures deeply frustrating. She had a particular difficulty accepting that rules applied to her the same way they applied to everyone else, and she had a habit of framing every pushback she received as a personal attack rather than a standard response. That pattern extended beyond work. When inconveniences disrupted her schedule, she often chose the quickest visible solution rather than the one being recommended to her. That morning, she was already running behind after an earlier delay and was irritated by anything that threatened to slow her down further. She took the next exit and pulled onto the shoulder of the off-ramp after her tire pressure warning light came on. Roadside assistance quoted her a 45-minute wait. She told the operator she didn't have that kind of time and ended the call before the explanation was finished. She stepped out, pressed the sidewall with her thumb, nudged it with her foot. It felt firm. The light had come on before. She dismissed it as another faulty sensor, locked the car, and walked toward the gas station instead. Inside, she moved quickly through the aisles, knocking a small display of bottled drinks with her elbow and leaving them scattered on the floor without stopping. She grabbed 2 items and walked directly to the front of the store, stepping around the 4 people already waiting in line. She placed her items on the counter, despite being told to wait. When another customer objected, she dismissed him and kept her position at the register. A loss prevention officer approached and instructed her to step back and wait her turn. She challenged his authority and remained at the counter. After he identified himself and repeated the instruction, she refused to move and continued insisting on immediate service. The officer warned that she would be asked to leave if she did not comply. She stayed in place, escalating the exchange as other customers watched. The cashier ultimately processed the transaction to end the confrontation. Michelle collected her items and exited the store, still visibly agitated. She exited the store, still visibly agitated, continuing her complaint as the doors closed behind her. She paused near the entrance, turned back briefly toward the glass, then stepped into the parking lot and pulled out her phone. She began typing her complaint as she walked, eyes fixed on the screen. Without slowing, she crossed the parking lot and continued editing the message as she approached the service road. The slight curve of the exit ramp and vehicles stopped along the shoulder limited her view of approaching traffic. Still focused on her phone, she stepped off the edge of the service road and into the active merge lane without looking up. The driver saw her too late and braked hard, but there was no meaningful stopping distance. The vehicle struck her before he could avoid it. She was knocked forward and came to rest near the right lane line. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Michelle was unresponsive with signs of severe trauma. She was transported to a hospital and died in the trauma unit 4 hours later. The medical examiner listed blunt force trauma as cause of death. The driver was not charged. The interstate closed for 2 hours for investigation. Investigators later obtained a statement from the store's loss prevention officer to establish Michelle's movements prior to the crash. It was June 22, 2019, when a warm coastal breeze carried the smell of ocean water across a boardwalk amusement park in Santa Cruz, California. Early evening crowds moved along the wooden planks between game booths and ride entrances as the sun descended toward the Pacific horizon. Music from competing sound systems created overlapping noise across the park. Brecken Holloway was 24 years old and pursuing a master's degree in business administration at a university in the Bay Area. Friends described him as competitive and image-focused, someone who frequently positioned himself as fearless and willing to take risks others avoided. That evening, he attended the park on a third date with a woman he had met through a professional networking event, and he had spent much of the evening attempting to impress her with displays of confidence and disregard for minor rules. Around 7 in the evening, the pair approached a scrambler ride positioned near the boardwalk center. The attraction consisted of rotating arms that spun individual cars in overlapping circular patterns, creating disorienting motion through the combination of the platform's rotation and each arm's independent spinning. Riders sat in two-person cars, equipped with a single lap bar that lowered across both occupants. Brecken and his date boarded one of the cars, and a ride attendant checked the lap bar before starting the ride. As the ride began, Brecken made a show of pushing the lap bar upward slightly, demonstrating to his date that it had some play in the locked position. He joked that the ride was barely holding them in and that he could easily slip out if he wanted to. His date later told investigators she had laughed uncomfortably, but asked him not to touch the restraint. As the scrambler accelerated and the spinning intensified, Brecken continued manipulating the lap bar. Witnesses in adjacent cars later reported seeing him deliberately lift the bar several inches, creating a visible gap between the restraint and his lap. His date reached over and attempted to push the bar back down, but he blocked her hand and made a comment about proving the ride was safe even without it. The scrambler's motion generated significant centrifugal force, particularly during moments when individual cars swung outward while the platform rotated at high speed. Approximately 90 seconds into the ride's cycle, Brecken's car entered a high-speed rotation while positioned at the outer edge of the platform. The combination of forces pulled his body toward the car's open side, where the lifted lap bar provided insufficient restraint. His torso slid toward the edge, and he grabbed the car's interior frame, attempting to brace himself. The motion continued, and his grip failed as the forces exceeded his ability to hold on. His body was pulled from the car and flung outward tangentially, striking one of the ride's steel support arms as centrifugal force carried him beyond the car's arc. The impact redirected his body clear of the ride's footprint, and he landed on the pavement adjacent to the attraction's perimeter. The operator, alerted by screaming from riders, initiated an emergency stop immediately. The ride's deceleration took approximately 15 seconds, during which the remaining cars continued their rotation until the platform came to rest. Park staff reached him within moments and found him unresponsive with severe injuries. Paramedics arrived within 7 minutes, but determined the injuries were unsurvivable, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner cited severe traumatic brain injury and cervical spine trauma from impact with the ride's support structure. Investigators confirmed he had deliberately lifted the lap bar, supported by witness statements and security footage. The park faced no liability, and his family declined legal action. Tamper-evident restraint systems were later installed.
It was June 17, 2017, and mid-afternoon heat pressed down on a resort water park in central Texas, where a winding, lazy river looped through landscaped rock formations and artificial palm groves. The park had been built in the late 1990s, and while the surface attractions had been updated over the years, much of the underground infrastructure, pumps, grates, plumbing, remained original. Hadley Krenwelge was 34 years old and worked as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation clinic in San Antonio. She was in town for her best friend's bachelorette weekend. 8 women sharing a rented house near the park, splitting the trip between pool days and evenings out. Hadley was the planner of the group, the one who booked the house, organized the restaurant reservations, and built the shared calendar down to the hour. Her best friend later told investigators that Hadley had spent more time planning the bachelorette weekend than her own vacation days that year. This honestly just made this story so much more difficult to write, knowing what comes next. The group arrived at the water park shortly after noon. By early afternoon, most of them had settled into the lazy river, a slow-moving loop roughly a quarter-mile long that carried riders on inflatable tubes through gentle turns and shaded sections. Hadley had been stepping off her tube at every turn to cool off in the water, walking a few steps along the bottom, then hopping back on. Friends later said she did it every single lap, at least 3 full circuits, laughing each time, saying the tube was too hot from the sun. It had become a running joke by the 3rd lap, and that's what makes this one hard to stomach. It was a joke. Nobody was even slightly worried, but honestly, I'd understand if somebody were to find this stupid as well. The river curved behind a decorative rock formation near a recirculation pump housing. This section sat deeper than the main channel, roughly 4.5 feet, designed to allow adequate water flow into the intake system. The nearest lifeguard station was roughly 80 feet away at the main pool, with the rock formation partially blocking the sightline into the curve. From the pictures I found online, the drainage grate on the pool floor in this section was an older industrial design, not a modern anti-entrapment model retrofitted when the park was built. One of 4 securing bolts had gone missing at some point, allowing the corner to lift roughly 2 inches, not enough to spot from the surface, but enough for a foot to slide under at an angle when weight pressed down. Hadley stepped off the tube at the turn. Her right foot slid beneath the lifted corner of the grate. Once her ankle joint passed the edge, the geometry locked, the ankle wider than the gap the toes had slipped through. The current pushed her body forward while her foot stayed anchored, bending her leg behind her at an angle she couldn't reverse. She pitched face forward and flat. Her head went beneath the surface. This is the part where I had to set my notes down for a minute. Tubers floated past in the shallower main channel. Some later told investigators they saw something beneath the surface near the rocks, but with the darker water in that section and the constant movement of tubes passing through, they didn't recognize it as a person. The section was calm, the water dark near the pump housing, and the rock formation blocked any clear view from above. Nobody processed what they were seeing. People floated right past her. I want you to sit with that. Her friends completed another half lap before one of them asked where Hadley was. They waited at the exit point. She didn't come around. They checked the lounge chairs, scanned the wave pool, asked the group still sunbathing if she'd come back. Nobody had seen her. They retraced the river route on foot, walking alongside the channel, checking each section. A friend spotted her submerged form near the rocks and began screaming. A lifeguard reached the section within a minute. 2 staff members entered the water and attempted to free her foot. The grate would not move. A maintenance team arrived with tools and removed the remaining bolts roughly 8 minutes later, only 8 minutes underwater. That's how long it took. That's the difference that could have saved somebody. I was beyond speechless at this point. Hadley was pulled from the water unresponsive. CPR was performed on the pool deck. Paramedics arrived within 10 minutes. Hadley was pronounced dead at a regional hospital. The medical examiner determined drowning secondary to mechanical underwater entrapment. Inspection revealed the missing bolt and non-compliant older grate design. The remaining bolts showed advanced corrosion. The missing one had sheared off, not been removed. It wasn't vandalism. It wasn't one person's negligence. And whether you think it was a stupid mistake or not, this is one of the saddest stories I've covered on this channel. The manufacturer issued a recall. The water park settled with Hadley's family, and her best friend postponed the wedding by 3 months.
It was May 7th, 2013. The afternoon air at a small amusement park outside Bandung, West Java, Indonesia, was thick with humidity and the mechanical hum of aging rides. Andy Prasetyo, a 24-year-old motorcycle mechanic, stood with 4 co-workers near the Tilt-A-Whirl attraction, laughing as maintenance crews prepared to restart the ride after a minor breakdown. Andy had worked at a motorcycle repair shop in central Bandung for 6 years, building a reputation for fearless hands-on work with engines and moving parts. His confidence around machinery bordered on carelessness. Co-workers recalled him reaching into running engines and dismissing protective equipment as unnecessary for someone with his experience. That afternoon, he'd organized the group outing to the park, his first day off in 3 weeks. The Tilt-A-Whirl's central motor unit sat in a shallow service pit, accessible from ground level, where maintenance staff had been addressing an oil pressure issue. A significant oil leak had created a 3 to 4 foot long oil slick beneath the motor assembly, the dark fluid pooling on concrete that sloped slightly toward the machinery. The rotating shaft coupling, normally protected by a steel guard, was completely exposed. The safety cover had been removed during maintenance and not replaced before operators restarted the system for a brief, authorized test cycle. A faded yellow maintenance rope that normally restricted access lay pushed to one side of the pit, its warning sign partially obscured. One of his co-workers suggested he could identify the motor problem just by touching the housing. Andy accepted immediately, approaching the pit area with the overconfidence that had defined his career. Park staff were occupied with controls inside a raised operator booth facing the ride platform, leaving the pit outside their direct line of sight, unaware of what was unfolding near the exposed machinery. Andy stepped onto the oil-slicked concrete, reaching toward the vibrating motor housing. His right foot slipped instantly on the greasy surface. He lurched forward, arms windmilling as he tried to regain balance. His momentum carried him chest first toward the spinning shaft coupling, a thick steel component rotating at several dozen RPM, fast enough that its surface motion was difficult to track at close range. His cotton work shirt made contact with the rotating shaft. The coupling grabbed the fabric immediately. Witnesses saw the shirt wrap around the shaft in less than a second, the mechanical advantage pulling Andy's entire torso into the machinery with brutal force. His chest compressed against the housing as the rotating shaft dragged him deeper into the mechanism. His body's resistance overloaded the drive system, and after several seconds, the motor protection relay tripped on excessive load, automatically cutting power. Andy hung motionless, partially drawn into the machinery. His co-workers screamed for help. Maintenance workers killed all power and began manually extracting Andy from the mechanism. Paramedics were called, arriving within 12 minutes, but pronounced him dead at the scene. The medical examiner's report documented catastrophic thoracic trauma. The examining physician noted that the rotating machinery had compressed the chest cavity beyond survivable limits. During police questioning, Andy's co-workers admitted the dare had been their idea, though investigators ruled the death accidental due to Andy's willing participation and the park's failure to restore protective guarding during the test run, issuing safety citations related to maintenance access control.
It was August 11th, 2017. The Phoenix summer heat had barely subsided by 10:30 in the evening, leaving the air at a humid 92 degrees. Aaron Pellick, a 26-year-old HVAC apprentice, arrived at a backyard party in the suburban Maryvale neighborhood with a 12-pack of beer and his usual Friday night energy. Aaron worked for a regional heating and cooling company, installing ductwork and assisting licensed technicians on residential jobs across the Phoenix metro area. He was competent at his trade, but unremarkable, earning modest wages while living with 2 roommates in a rental duplex. Friends described him as fun-loving but reckless after drinking, the type who accepted every dare without consideration. He had been arrested once for public intoxication, but avoided serious consequences. That evening, the party was held at a rental home undergoing renovation. The backyard featured an in-ground pool drained 3 weeks earlier for resurfacing, though the work remained incomplete. A thin sheen of leftover plaster and a partially draped blue tarp in the deep end reflected the streetlight, tricking several guests into thinking the pool still held water. The pool lights had been disconnected during demolition, leaving the deep end in darkness. From ground level, the dark blue concrete reflected ambient light from nearby houses, enhancing the illusion that fooled multiple partygoers. A portable ladder leaned against the pool wall left by the resurfacing crew. By 11:45 in the evening, Aaron had consumed at least 8 beers. The temperature remained oppressive, and several guests complained about the heat. Someone suggested jumping in the pool. Aaron, standing near the patio, announced he would go first. 3 witnesses later told investigators they genuinely believed the pool contained water based on how the surface appeared in the darkness. Nobody turned on flashlights or checked the pool depth. Music had been turned down moments earlier when the host paused the playlist, and most guests were clustered near the patio or inside the house. The host, equally intoxicated, did not warn anyone. Aaron walked to the opposite end of the yard, building momentum for what he intended as a dramatic entrance. The pool measured 8 feet deep at that end, with hard concrete awaiting resurfacing treatment. Aaron sprinted toward the pool edge and launched himself in a diving position, arms extended forward, head angled downward. He covered roughly 12 feet of airspace before making contact. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. The impact produced a sickening crack. His body collapsed instantly, folding unnaturally at the neck before settling motionless at the bottom. His legs twitched twice, then stopped. One guest called emergency services. Paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. They used the portable ladder left by the resurfacing crew to safely descend into the deep end. They immediately recognized the injuries as unsurvivable. Aaron was pronounced dead at the scene. Forensic exam later recorded a catastrophic high cervical injury, atlanto-occipital dissociation with transection of the upper cervical spinal cord, and immediate loss of brainstem function, injuries incompatible with life. The party dispersed within minutes of paramedic arrival. Police found beer bottles, plastic cups, and half-eaten food abandoned across the yard. Officers photographed the scene, measured the pool and run-up distance, and collected phones for forensic analysis. Toxicology tests later confirmed alcohol intoxication consistent with witness accounts. Several guests recorded video earlier that evening, but none captured the actual dive. Aaron's funeral drew over 200 attendees, mostly co-workers and drinking buddies from the service industry. His family filed no lawsuit, citing his own poor judgment as the primary cause.
It was March 3rd, 2016, in Memphis, Tennessee. The early afternoon was clear and cold, with temperatures in the low 40s and a wind coming off the river. Downtown streets were busy with a steady mix of locals and visitors on weekends. Olivia Fitch, 43, was a customer service supervisor at a call center outside Memphis. Her co-workers described her as difficult to redirect once she had made up her mind about something, and quick to interpret any challenge to her judgment as disrespect. She had driven downtown that afternoon with her teenage daughter for lunch and a walk along the riverfront. While returning to her car in a nearby surface parking lot, she realized her phone was no longer in her purse. She retraced her steps mentally and became certain she had left it at the restaurant 2 blocks away. She called it from her daughter's phone. It rang, and then someone answered briefly before hanging up. She concluded immediately that someone had stolen it and muttered that people had no respect anymore, adding that she wasn't about to let someone just take her property. She opened a tracking app on her daughter's phone and saw the location indicator moving steadily along a nearby road, consistent with slow vehicle traffic. Rather than calling the police, Olivia decided she would handle it herself. She told her daughter to stay near the car and not move. She moved quickly toward the road, eyes fixed on the moving location indicator. The tracking app showed the phone continuing north at a steady pace, consistent with slow-moving vehicle traffic. A rideshare vehicle that had been sitting at a light near the parking lot exit began pulling forward, accelerating gradually as it merged into the lane. Olivia had spotted someone in the back seat holding a phone and had already decided that it was hers. She stepped off the curb and moved alongside the passenger side as the vehicle began accelerating through slow traffic. Drivers behind the rideshare tapped their brakes, unsure why a woman was moving into the lane. Olivia shouted toward the rear window, insisting the phone was hers. As the car reached approximately 15 miles per hour, she grabbed the rear door handle with one hand and struck the side of the vehicle with the other, demanding the passenger open the door. She reached toward the partially lowered rear window and thrust her arm inside, attempting to grab the phone directly. The driver, startled by the sudden movement alongside the vehicle, braked hard. Olivia had no stable footing and had not secured her grip on the doorframe. The abrupt stop threw her backward. Her hand slipped free, and she fell onto the road surface, striking the back of her head against the asphalt. The impact caused pedestrians on the sidewalk to turn immediately. The vehicle came to a stop, and the driver and passenger exited as traffic behind them halted. The passenger, a college student, had found the phone on the sidewalk outside the restaurant and had been attempting to identify the owner when the call came through. He exited the vehicle holding the phone in plain view and later gave a statement to police. Bystanders on the sidewalk called 911. Olivia was on the ground and not moving. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. Olivia sustained a severe traumatic brain injury and never regained consciousness. She was transported to a hospital and died later that evening. An autopsy determined the cause of death to be blunt force traumatic brain injury resulting from the fall. The manner of death was ruled accidental. Her 15-year-old daughter was released to a family member. The passenger returned the phone and cooperated with investigators. No charges were filed. It was October 13th, 2018, and cool evening air drifted across a pier amusement park extending over the Atlantic Ocean near Wildwood, New Jersey. The smell of salt water mixed with boardwalk food as colored lights reflected off dark waves below. Crowds had thinned following the summer season, but weekend visitors still filled the pier's attractions. Colette Brennan was 51 years old and worked as a commercial real estate broker in the Philadelphia metro area, managing a portfolio of high-value clients on a schedule that regularly exceeded 60 hours per week. Family later described her as driven but increasingly stubborn about addressing recent medical symptoms. Over the previous 6 weeks, she had experienced intermittent severe headaches and vision disturbances, but postponed seeing a physician, attributing the symptoms to stress and lack of sleep. That Saturday evening marked a family celebration for her daughter's engagement, with roughly 12 relatives gathering at the pier for dinner and rides. Her son's 3 children, ages 4 through 8, were among the group. Despite a dull headache that afternoon, Colette had taken over-the-counter pain medication and insisted on joining fully. Around 7:30, The grandchildren asked to ride a classic spinning teacup attraction near the pier's midpoint. The ride featured oversized cup-shaped vehicle on a rotating platform, each capable of independent spinning via a central wheel. The combined motion created disorienting circular movement. Posted signage warned guests with heart conditions, high blood pressure, or neurological issues to avoid the attraction. Colette's daughter read the warnings aloud and suggested her mother sit out, citing her recent headaches. Colette dismissed the concern and climbed into a cup with her 3 grandchildren, settling the youngest beside her as the operator reminded riders to stay seated individually. The ride began with gentle rotation as the platform accelerated gradually. The children immediately grabbed the central wheel and began spinning the cup aggressively, laughing as the motion intensified. Colette smiled initially, but witnesses in adjacent cups later reported that her expression changed noticeably within the first 30 seconds of the ride. Her face appeared to tense, and she closed her eyes while gripping the cup's edge. Approximately 1 minute into the 2.5-minute ride cycle, Colette's head tilted backward against the cup's interior wall. Her grip on the edge loosened, and her body began to slump. The oldest grandchild stopped spinning the wheel and called to her repeatedly, but she did not respond. As the platform continued rotating, other riders noticed and began signaling to the operator. The operator reduced speed and brought the ride to a stop within 15 seconds. But the gradual deceleration required by safety protocols meant the platform completed nearly a full additional rotation before halting. Family members rushed to the cup and found Colette unconscious, her breathing shallow and irregular. The grandchildren were removed immediately, and emergency services were contacted. Paramedics arrived within minutes and found Colette unresponsive with fixed, dilated pupils. She was transported to a nearby medical center where imaging revealed a massive subarachnoid hemorrhage caused by a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. Neurosurgeons determined the damage was catastrophic and non-survivable. The medical examiner concluded that Colette had likely harbored an undiagnosed aneurysm for months or years, with her recent headaches representing warning episodes of minor bleeding. The ride's spinning motion and G-forces triggered the fatal rupture. Her family later established a scholarship fund in her name, promoting health awareness.
It was August 23, 2014, and late summer light stretched across a lakeside amusement park in the Masuria Lake District of northeastern Poland, where a cluster of aging rides and game stalls sat on a grassy clearing between the lake shore and a birch forest. Weekend visitors moved between attractions in the warm afternoon air, and the smell of grilled kielbasa drifted from a food stall near the entrance. Patricia Wojciak was 22 years old and worked as an apprentice at a family bakery in Olsztyn, roughly an hour southwest. She was on her annual summer weekend trip with 3 friends from the bakery, a tradition they'd maintained since their first year working together. Each summer, they picked a different lake town and spent 2 days doing as little as possible. This year, it was Masuria. The group reached the bumper boat attraction shortly after 3 in the afternoon. 3 of them climbed into boats immediately. 1 blue, 1 red, 1 yellow. Patricia didn't. She walked around the dock for 5 minutes, circling the remaining boats, running her hand along the edge of each one, changing her mind between the blue one near the back and a green one docked at the front of the pool. Her friends floated in their boats, shouting at her to just pick one. She took more than 5 minutes choosing a boat color. I need you to remember that. She finally climbed into the green boat, the one docked closest to a concrete-mounted junction box at the pool's edge. It shakes me to my core knowing if she'd picked the blue one at the back, I wouldn't be telling this story. The junction box was not part of the bumper boat motor system. It was a 230-volt AC shore power connection, part of the park's electrical infrastructure powering dockside lighting, the operator's booth, and a water circulation pump. Years of exposure to lake water, rain, and seasonal freeze-thaw cycles had corroded the insulation around the box's internal wiring. Patricia stood barefoot on the wet concrete dock, gripping the green boat's wet gunnel with her right hand as she lowered herself in. Corroded insulation had energized both the surrounding pool water and the wet dock surface at different electrical potentials. Current passed through her hand, across her chest, and out through her feet. a hand-to-feet pathway directly across the heart at mains voltage. When I read the electrical report, that pathway across the heart is what stopped me cold. She stiffened upright for a moment, then collapsed forward into the boat. Her hand remained gripping the gunwale for a second before releasing. The boat drifted slowly away from the dock. Her friends, already floating nearby, initially laughed. She was slumped forward with her head down, not moving, and they assumed she was doing a bit, playing dead to get back at them for rushing her. One friend called her name, then again louder. Another steered his boat alongside and bumped it against hers. Patrizia didn't react. Her arms hung limp over the gunwale, trailing in the water. The laughter stopped, and just even visualizing that, I can't get the image out of my head. The operator cut power to the attraction roughly 40 seconds later when the shouting from the pool reached him. Two bystanders waded into the shallow boarding area and pulled Patrizia from the boat onto the dock. A visitor with first aid training began chest compressions immediately. Paramedics arrived within 12 minutes and continued resuscitation during transport. Patrizia was pronounced dead at a regional hospital. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be cardiac arrest from electrical shock, the current pathway consistent with hand-to-feet conduction across the heart at mains voltage. The park was shut down immediately. Electrical inspection revealed the corroded 230-volt junction box and 2 additional wiring faults in the dock infrastructure. Criminal charges were filed against the park operator for negligent maintenance. Honestly, that's the only part of this aftermath that gave me any sense of justice. Poland's National Amusement Safety Authority issued revised electrical inspection mandates for all waterfront attractions. Patrizia's bakery hung a framed photograph of her near the front counter that remained for years.
It was April 19th, 2015. The morning air on a private wooded property outside Eugene, Oregon was mild and still, perfect conditions for clearing trees. Marla Song, a 41-year-old homemaker with no logging experience, stood 30 feet from a towering Douglas fir. Her smartphone held steady as her neighbor prepared to fell the massive tree. What should have been a routine property maintenance task would become one of the most preventable fatalities in amateur tree removal history. Marla had spent the past 3 years building a modest following on social media platforms, documenting her rural lifestyle with carefully staged photos and videos of farm animals, garden harvests, and property projects. She had no professional photography training, but took pride in capturing dramatic angles that generated engagement. Friends described her as determined and image-focused, someone who spent considerable time planning shots rather than participating in actual work. Her feed showed hundreds of carefully composed images, many requiring her to position herself in dangerously exposed locations for optimal framing. That morning, her neighbor had hired a local handyman service to remove several dead trees, threatening both properties. The crew used consumer-grade chainsaws and basic protective equipment, including helmets, eye protection, and chaps. Tree felling requires understanding weight distribution, lean direction, and the unpredictable behavior of splitting wood under tension. Even experienced loggers maintain strict safety zones extending twice the tree's height in all directions. A 90-foot Douglas fir demands a minimum 180-foot clearance radius, which was not fully observed that morning. The handyman made his initial directional cut, then began the back cut that would release the tree. Marla positioned herself directly in line with the trunk's base, insisting the straight-down perspective would create compelling footage. The crew supervisor told her twice to move behind the marked safety line. Marla waved him off both times, stating she wanted the unobstructed shot and would move when necessary. Her camera remained focused on the cutting operation from her dangerous vantage point. The handyman completed his back cut and stepped away quickly, shouting the standard timber warning. The massive trunk began its descent away from Marla's position as planned, the directional cuts working exactly as intended. For 3 seconds, everything proceeded normally. Then undetected internal decay that a cursory inspection missed caused the trunk to split along a hidden fault line. Physics and gravity took over instantly. The upper 60-foot section separated completely, the hinge failed catastrophically, and the upper section swung unpredictably before collapsing straight down. Marla's camera captured the dark mass of bark and wood filling her frame in the final half second before impact. The section, estimated to weigh several thousand pounds, dropped straight down onto her shoulders and upper chest, the force driving her backward and causing catastrophic thoracic and spinal compression. Her body disappeared beneath the timber as her phone skittered across forest floor. The handyman called emergency services immediately. Responders arrived within 12 minutes but could not access Marla's body without heavy equipment to lift the massive section. Sheriff's deputies secured the scene while a contracted logging company brought a mobile crane, reaching her 40 minutes after impact. She was pronounced dead at the scene after extraction. Injuries were incompatible with survival. The county sheriff's department seized Marla's phone and examined its metadata. The footage showing verbal warnings and her refusal to relocate was included in the official investigative report. Investigators found no criminal negligence on the part of the property owner or the handyman service. It was February 3rd, 2013. The production floor of an automotive parts manufacturing facility in Monterrey, Mexico, hummed with the steady rhythm of conveyor systems moving stamped metal components through assembly stations. Luis Carlo Calderon, a 38-year-old assembly line worker, stood near Station 7, adjusting his loose work jacket against the facility's draft, unaware that this slow Sunday shift would end in mechanical horror. Luis had worked the line for 11 years, earning a reputation as the shift comedian who kept morale up during tedious 12-hour rotations. He specialized in quality control inspection, checking welded automotive brackets as they passed on the main conveyor system, traveling at 1.5 feet per second. Luis supported his wife and 2 teenage daughters on his modest salary, supplemented by weekend overtime that kept him at the facility even during minimal staffing periods when supervision was sparse. Industrial conveyors use powerful rollers capable of pulling in fabric or loose clothing and crushing anything caught between them. The system had a main stop switch at the operator station, but no pull cord or emergency stop near the merge point. That Sunday morning, production quotas were light due to inventory surplus. Only 6 workers staffed the normally bustling floor, with the facility supervisor attending a maintenance meeting in the administrative building. The skeletal crew had already completed their assignments by 10:30 in the morning, leaving hours of paid time with nothing to inspect. Luis and 3 co-workers gathered near the main conveyor line, joking about the easy shift and discussing weekend soccer matches. Someone made a comment about riding the belt like workers did in old factory footage. Luis laughed it off initially, but the co-workers persisted, calling him too cautious and old. The belt moved slowly enough that it seemed harmless, just a brief ride for a few seconds before hopping off. Luis likely knew it violated every safety protocol drilled into workers, including lockout/tagout rules and the prohibition on horseplay near moving machinery. But the crew's teasing and the mind-numbing boredom of the shift must have overrode his judgment. Luis sat down sideways on the moving belt, grinning at his co-workers. His loose work jacket, worn deliberately oversized for comfort during cold shifts, hung past his waist. Within 3 seconds, the fabric hem caught between 2 rollers at a merge point where the belt narrowed. The mechanical grab was instantaneous and irreversible. Luis's torso jerked violently toward the roller mechanism as the conveyor's motor pulled him in with industrial force. His co-workers shouted and lunged forward, but the system moved faster than human reaction. The rollers compressed his chest cavity, pulling him deeper into the mechanism. His neck hyperflexed forward at an extreme angle as his body contorted around the machinery, vertebrae crackling audibly. His screams lasted approximately 4 seconds before his crushed lungs could no longer force air through his constricted airway. A co-worker reached the emergency cutoff within about 20 seconds, but without pull cords near the merge point, the shutdown was delayed. The belt stopped with Luis still trapped in the rollers. Another worker called emergency services. Paramedics arrived and pronounced him dead at the scene. Maintenance crews later disassembled part of the conveyor to recover his body. The medical examiner's report confirmed massive chest trauma with complete bilateral lung collapse, multiple rib fractures that punctured vital organs, and catastrophic cervical spine injury at the C2 to C3 level. The neck damage severed critical pathways, controlling breathing and circulation, causing near instantaneous loss of consciousness followed by death within minutes. The facility's security cameras captured the incident. IT made a forensic copy of the original DVR file, and investigators sealed the original drive as evidence to maintain chain of custody. Management implemented mandatory retraining, assigned permanent floor supervisors even during low production shifts, and were cited by labor safety investigators for non-compliance regarding machine guarding, requiring an engineering corrective plan including guards and interlocks.
It was July 14, 2017, in Chicago, Illinois. The rooftop bar sat on the 9th floor of a converted warehouse in the West Loop with a wraparound terrace and waist-high glass barrier pan framed in black steel. Melissa Corin, 34, was a marketing consultant. She was particular about her image and quick to argue when she felt a rule was being applied to her unnecessarily. People who knew her described her as someone who needed to feel ahead of things, ahead of trends, ahead of other people. A former colleague once said, Melissa had a way of deciding in advance that she was the exception to whatever was being asked of her. She arrived that evening with a friend. The two of them had talked about visiting the bar for almost a year, passing the idea back and forth until they finally picked a date. It had been on both of their lists for a long time, and Melissa wanted a photo that did the view justice. She ordered drinks at the outdoor bar and spent the first 20 minutes circling the terrace. She repeatedly rejected angles that didn't frame the skyline the way she wanted. Each attempt seemed to frustrate her more. She repositioned chairs, stepped into walkways, and asked her friend to retake the photo several times. Nearby guests began glancing over as her voice carried across the terrace. Small signs posted near the entrance and along the perimeter stated that guests were not permitted to lean over the railing or stand on furniture. Melissa eventually settled on the northwest corner, where the skyline framing was cleanest. She leaned her phone over the top of the barrier to get the height in the shot. A staff member approached and asked her not to lean over the barrier, explaining it was a safety policy. Melissa responded loudly enough for people at neighboring tables to hear, arguing that the glass reached her waist and that she wasn't doing anything unsafe. He asked her to step back. She shook her head and turned toward the skyline again. When he stepped away briefly, she climbed onto a cushioned bench near the corner. The added height dropped the barrier to mid-thigh, leaving open air above it. Her friend, standing a few feet away, told her to get down. A couple seated near the railing looked over as Melissa waved a hand dismissively and continued adjusting her stance. The staff member returned and instructed her to step off the bench immediately. Melissa replied that she was almost done and held up one finger without looking at him. He repeated the instruction. She turned slightly toward him, saying the bar was being overly cautious, and as she gestured backward with her right arm, her heel pressed deeper into the cushion behind her. The cushion shifted under her weight. Her left foot slid and her upper body tipped forward. By the time she reached for the top rail, she was already too far over the edge to recover. She went over the barrier and fell from the 9th floor terrace to the alley below. Emergency services arrived within minutes. She was transported to a nearby hospital with injuries that were not survivable. She was pronounced dead that evening. An autopsy later determined the cause of death to be multiple blunt force injuries sustained in the fall. The manner of death was ruled accidental. Her friend was treated on scene for shock. The staff member, who had twice asked Melissa to step down, gave a statement to responding officers. The bar closed the rooftop terrace for the remainder of the week. Following the incident, the ownership group removed the bench seating from the perimeter zone entirely and installed secondary cable barriers set 18 inches inward from the glass panel. Staff were given updated guidance on escalating safety interventions to management rather than continuing one-on-one conversations when a guest refused to comply.
It was August 11th, 2016, in Phoenix, Arizona. Heat shimmered off the pavement as rush hour began. Interstate 10 was experiencing moderate traffic as commuters headed out of the city. Angela Merrick, 39, worked in administrative management for a regional logistics company and traveled frequently for short business trips. Colleagues described her as highly organized but easily frustrated when plans changed or schedules slipped. That afternoon, she had requested a rideshare to the airport for a 6:30 p.m. flight and was picked up from her downtown office at 4:45 p.m. From the moment she entered the vehicle, Angela complained about the car's temperature, the music volume, and the route shown on the navigation screen, reminding the driver she traveled often and expected rides to follow her instructions. She demanded a specific route despite his explanation that the app reflected current traffic conditions, interrupting him repeatedly and warning she would leave a negative rating if the route wasn't changed. She emphasized that she had important plans and could not afford delays, maintaining a dismissive tone throughout the exchange. Seated behind the driver, Angela repeatedly leaned forward to watch the navigation screen, questioning each turn while scrolling through her phone. As they merged onto the interstate, she again challenged the route and insisted on an alternate exit, raising her voice and stating the driver should follow customer instructions rather than the app's guidance. The driver politely declined. Angela became increasingly agitated, raising her voice and accusing him of intentionally delaying her trip. The driver remained calm and continued in the center lane. Angela unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned forward between the front seats, pointing at the navigation screen and demanding he change routes. The driver told her to sit back and refasten her seatbelt. She refused. Without warning, Angela reached over the driver's right shoulder and grabbed the steering wheel with both hands. She pulled it sharply to the right, attempting to force the car toward the exit. The driver immediately tried to regain control, pulling the wheel back while taking his foot off the accelerator. The car swerved into the right lane as a sedan braked and honked. The driver overcorrected, sending the vehicle back toward the center lane while he fought for control. Angela continued gripping the wheel, forcing it right again and pushing the car sharply toward the shoulder. The car's right front tire caught the edge where pavement met the raised shoulder. At approximately 55 miles per hour, the vehicle veered onto the shoulder. The driver attempted to straighten the wheel, but Angela's grip prevented correction. The car traveled approximately 40 feet along the shoulder before the right tires hit loose gravel. The vehicle became unstable and began rotating clockwise. Angela was thrown forward into the front cabin area as the car spun. The vehicle rotated approximately 120 degrees, and the passenger side struck a concrete support pillar at approximately 45 miles per hour. The impact crushed the rear passenger compartment where Angela's body was positioned. The driver was restrained by his seatbelt and deployed airbag. Angela was motionless, pinned between the front and back seats. Multiple witnesses stopped and called emergency services. First responders arrived within 8 minutes. The driver suffered a concussion, fractured ribs, and lacerations. Angela was unresponsive and trapped in the wreckage. Extraction took 22 minutes. She was transported to a medical facility but pronounced dead en route. The cause of death was massive internal injuries and severe thoracic trauma from the impact. Dash cam footage clearly showed Angela grabbing the steering wheel and causing the loss of control. Her seatbelt was unbuckled at the time of the crash. The case was ruled an accidental death, with Angela's actions determined to be the direct cause. The rideshare driver was not charged and cleared of any wrongdoing.
It was September 19, 2015, at a county fairground outside Lincoln, Nebraska, where a traveling carnival filled the grounds with spinning rides, diesel generators, and evening crowds moving between booths under string lights. Sienna Palmieri, 21, worked as a shift supervisor at a retail clothing store in a regional shopping mall. Standing 4'11" and weighing about 95 pounds, her petite build had long been a source of insecurity. Friends described her as outgoing but sensitive about her size, often resisting suggestions that certain activities might not suit her stature. That Saturday evening, Sienna attended the fair with her boyfriend of 8 months and several of his longtime friends, most of whom she had only recently met. After spending the afternoon visiting livestock exhibits and playing midway games, the group turned to the carnival rides as night fell. Around 7:30 p.m., they approached a pendulum swing ride near the fair's main entrance. The pendulum ride used a 60-foot mechanical arm that swung riders in wide arcs to heights of about 70 feet, with outward-facing seats secured by over-shoulder restraints and lap bars. Posted signs required a minimum height of 52 inches and warned that the restraints were designed for average adult builds. During loading, the operator hesitated at Sienna's small frame and warned the restraints might not secure her properly, suggesting she sit out. Sienna's boyfriend insisted she would be fine, and others supported him, calling the concern unnecessary. Facing pressure from the group and a growing line, the operator relented and directed her to a seat near the center. The restraint system consisted of a padded over-shoulder harness that lowered from above and a secondary lap bar that locked across the rider's thighs. The design assumed riders would fill the seat adequately to create secure contact points. When the operator lowered Sienna's harness, visible gaps remained between the padding and her shoulder. The lap bar similarly rested several inches above her thigh. The operator adjusted the restraints to their tightest setting but could not eliminate the gaps. He paused, then asked Sienna if she felt secure. She insisted she was fine and that the restraints felt tight enough. The operator later told investigators he had voiced concern a second time, but ultimately started the ride after other guests began complaining about the delay. The pendulum began swinging, gradually increasing its arc over several cycles. For the first 30 seconds, Sienna appeared stable in her seat. As the swing's amplitude increased and the arm approached its maximum arc, the forces acting on riders intensified. Witnesses later reported that Sienna's body began shifting within the restraints during the third or fourth full swing. The gaps between her small frame and the padded harness allowed upward movement at the swing's apex, where brief weightlessness reduced the pressure holding her in the seat. On the fifth swing, as the arm reached its highest point, Sienna slipped upward through the gap between the harness and lap bar. Her body separated from the seat entirely and fell approximately 70 feet, striking the fairground pavement near the ride's perimeter fence. Screams erupted from riders and spectators as the operator immediately initiated an emergency stop. The pendulum continued through several diminishing arcs before coming to rest. Carnival staff and fairground security reached Sienna within moments. She was unresponsive and not breathing. Paramedics arrived within 10 minutes and found her pulseless, with injuries incompatible with survival. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death massive blunt force trauma, including skull fracture, spinal injury, and organ rupture. Investigators found the ride had passed mechanical inspections, but the operator failed to follow guidelines on rider size and restraint fit. The company received citations and suspended operations, and Sienna's family secured a settlement that prompted stricter operator training and enforcement of size restrictions.
It was April 11th, 2016, and a cold spring morning settled over a regional theme park in Baden-Württemberg, southern Germany. The park wouldn't open to visitors for another 3 hours, but maintenance crews were already scattered across the grounds, running pre-opening test cycles on the rides. Breath fogged in the early air, and the walkways sat empty under gray overcast. Benno Kirschbaum was 24 years old and in his third season as a seasonal ride technician at the park. The job ran spring through autumn, filling the months around his winter carpentry apprenticeship in a nearby town. He knew the park's systems thoroughly: ride mechanics, control software, sensor calibration, and took visible pride in how quickly he could resolve faults. Co-workers later told investigators he was always the fastest technician on the morning crew, clearing issues before anyone else had finished their first coffee. They also said he never followed lockout-tagout procedure. The protocol required a full system shutdown, physical locking of the power source, and tagging the control panel before anyone entered a track zone, a process that took roughly 15 minutes from initiation to clearance. Benno said the sensor faults took 30 seconds to fix, and the full shutdown was a waste of everyone's time. He'd done it dozens of times without incident. One co-worker later told investigators she had confronted him about it twice. Both times he tapped his watch and told her the park opened in 20 minutes. She warned him twice. "I keep thinking about what that must feel like for her now. That morning, a recurring sensor fault had triggered a stoppage on a mid-size coaster during test cycles. Benno had arrived ahead of the rest of the crew to clear it before they reached that section of the park. He was alone. The ride operator was in the station roughly 40 feet away, monitoring the control panel with no direct sightline to the sensor column. So according to one article I read, the track zone was enclosed by perimeter fencing with a single maintenance gate. The gate had an interlock. Opening it forced an automatic system shutdown and required a full restart. 15 minutes. Benno ducked under a low section of the perimeter fencing instead. He walked to the sensor housing mounted on a support column roughly 40 feet from the station. The ride control system registered no gate opening. As far as the software was concerned, the track zone was empty. Benno crouched at the column base and began working on the sensor. He had no radio. No one in the station knew he was there. Alone, no radio, no lockout. When I read that, I knew this story was going to be tough, regardless of my personal opinions. The system completed its diagnostic reset cycle. With no interlock triggered and all automated checks reading clear, the software dispatched the next test car at full operational speed. The ride operator heard the dispatch tone and looked up from the panel. He later told investigators he saw the car leave the station and realized within seconds that he hadn't confirmed the track was clear, but the car was already past the first curve. He hit the emergency stop. Magnetic brakes engaged on the next straight section, but the car had already passed the support column. The feeling of being too late in a situation like that, I still can't process what that must have felt like. Co-workers reached the column within a minute. Benno was pinned between the car and the fixed structure, unresponsive, with catastrophic visible injuries to his torso. Emergency services arrived within 15 minutes. Benno was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined fatal crush injuries to the chest and abdomen, traumatic thoracic compression with organ rupture. The park was fined by the Federal Workplace Safety Authority. Investigation revealed multiple technicians had been bypassing lockout-tagout for at least 2 seasons. Several testified they'd seen Benno enter track zones during live test cycles on previous mornings. They all saw it for 2 seasons, and nobody stopped it until someone died. That angers me beyond belief. The park implemented 2-person verification and motion sensors. The co-worker who warned him twice was not disciplined.
It was November 6, 2018. The evening traffic in Hanoi's Old Quarter moved in its usual chaotic rhythm, motorbikes weaving through narrow streets under fading light. Pham Quang Huy, a 23-year-old delivery courier, wove through the congestion with practiced ease, unaware that the next 3 minutes would claim 2 lives and change multiple families forever. Huy had worked as a motorbike courier for a regional food delivery service for 18 months, completing hundreds of deliveries across Hanoi's dense urban landscape. He earned barely enough to share a cramped apartment with 3 other couriers, supplementing his income through weekend racing bets organized in industrial parking lots. His social media showed dozens of videos performing wheelies, no-handed riding, and standing on his seat while moving, all filmed by other couriers who encouraged his behavior. The delivery service had issued 2 written warnings about unsafe riding after customer complaints, but enforcement was lax in an industry where speed determined earnings. Motorbike courier work in Hanoi demands navigating some of the world's densest traffic, where millions of scooters and motorcycles share narrow streets with cars, buses, and pedestrians. Riders must maintain constant awareness of shifting gaps, sudden stops, and road debris while balancing insulated delivery bags that affect handling. That evening, Huy had completed 6 deliveries and was riding back through the Old Quarter around 7:15 in the evening. Traffic was particularly heavy due to rush hour congestion. Multiple witnesses later reported seeing Huy weaving aggressively between vehicles, apparently trying to impress a group of younger couriers riding nearby. One courier shouted at him to stop showing off, but Huy ignored the warning. While traveling approximately 10 miles per hour, Huy stood fully upright on his scooter seat, arms extended like wings for balance. His helmet camera captured the moment, showing his feet planted on the narrow seat as surrounding traffic continued moving. Other couriers were laughing and shouting encouragement. Several nearby riders yelled at him to sit down. 3 seconds after standing, Huy's front wheel struck a piece of broken plastic likely fallen from a vendor's cracked crate in the street. The impact caused the handlebars to jerk violently right. With his weight elevated and no way to correct, Hoey toppled backward off the scooter. His body fell headfirst toward the asphalt from approximately 4 feet up. The helmet's outer shell was cracked and the chin strap had come loose, a detail the examiner cited when describing the severity of the head trauma. The unmanned scooter, still moving, glanced left and slid directly into the path of another motorcycle carrying an adult rider and a passenger. The collision threw both riders into the adjacent traffic lane. A public city bus traveling in that lane had no time to brake. Witnesses reported the passenger was struck by the bus's front and ran partly under the chassis, while the rider rolled clear. He remained motionless on the roadway as other riders swerved to avoid him. Paramedics arrived in about 11 minutes following an emergency call from one of the motorists, who showed no vital signs at the scene. The passenger was rushed to a municipal hospital but declared dead on arrival. The medical examiner determined Hui died from fractures of the cranial vault with extensive intracranial hemorrhage, consistent with high-energy blunt trauma. The passenger's autopsy revealed fatal chest compression and massive internal bleeding. The delivery platform deactivated Hui's courier account posthumously and released a short safety advisory warning against stunt riding. The surviving rider relocated outside Hanoi and requested privacy. Hui's courier route was quietly reassigned 3 days later with no company statement.
It was June 11th, 2018, in Scottsdale, Arizona. A heat advisory had been issued across the valley, and one of the city's most exclusive thermal spas was operating at capacity, its staff working carefully through a busy afternoon. Renata Voss, 44, a regional operations manager for a luxury retail chain, considered herself someone who did not need to be told how to use her own body. She had been a member at the spa for 2 years and had developed a reputation among the staff as a difficult guest, not hostile exactly, but dismissive in a way that made routine safety reminders feel like confrontations. She regularly exceeded the posted sauna limits, declined water when it was offered, and had on at least 2 previous visits been asked to observe the cool-down protocol before approaching the plunge pool. Staff recognized her when she arrived that afternoon and noted privately that she seemed more irritable than usual. What the staff did not know, and what Renata had not disclosed, was that she had been treating severe high blood pressure for 2 years, but had recently stopped taking her medication without consulting her doctor. She told a close friend the prescription made her feel sluggish, and that she planned to manage the condition through lifestyle changes instead. In the weeks that followed, her blood pressure rose back into the dangerous range her physician had previously warned her about. She never scheduled a follow-up appointment. She also mentioned a lingering 2-day headache and a heavy pressure behind her eyes, dismissing both as stress from work. The spa prides itself on its strict safety protocols, a 15-minute sauna limit, mandatory hydration breaks, and a strictly enforced prohibition on moving directly between extreme heat and cold without a cool-down period. These rules were standard policy, observed on every operating day, regardless of conditions outside. At 2:15 p.m., Renata entered the cedar sauna on the facility's upper level. The room was running at approximately 190 degrees Fahrenheit, well within the facility's operating range, but demanding even for guests in good health. A staff member checked on her at the 15-minute mark and reminded her that her session time had elapsed. She told the attendant she had been coming there for 2 years and did not need to be timed like a beginner, adding that she paid premium membership fees and expected to be treated accordingly. The staff member noted that her face was deeply flushed and that she had not touched the water bottle she had been given at the front desk. A second staff member returned 10 minutes later and made a more direct request, explaining that the limit existed for physiological reasons and was not a matter of preference. Renata gathered her things slowly, made a remark about being monitored like a child, and walked out into the corridor flushed and moving, with an unsteadiness she did not acknowledge. She paused once in the corridor, one hand briefly against the wall, before continuing forward. She had been in the sauna for just over 25 minutes. Rather than moving to the designated cool-down area, she walked directly to the plunge pool at the far end of the corridor. A staff member called after her. She rounded on him and, in a sharp, dismissive gesture, kicked the rubber safety wedge from beside the pool entry. It skidded across the wet tile. Her momentum carried her forward. With the wedge displaced and the tile slick beneath her feet, she lost her balance and went over the edge into the 50-degree water. What followed was not instantaneous. The sudden immersion triggered an involuntary gasp and a sharp constriction of blood vessels, placing additional strain on a cardiovascular system that had already been under stress for more than half an hour. Witnesses later reported that she emitted a strained guttural sound and briefly brought a hand toward her temple before her grip loosened. Her body slackened and she slipped beneath the surface without attempting to resurface. Staff reached her within moments and pulled her from the pool. Paramedics arrived a few minutes after the emergency call was placed and transported her to a medical center. Renata Voss was pronounced dead at 4:02 p.m. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as intracerebral hemorrhage with hypertensive cardiovascular disease and acute thermal stress, listed as significant contributing factors. Immediately following the incident, local health authorities ordered the spa to suspend operations pending a formal investigation. The facility was temporarily shut down while inspectors reviewed safety logs, staff training records, surveillance footage, and emergency response procedures. It was April 14th, 2019, when spring sunshine illuminated the steel tracks of a prominent roller coaster at a major theme park outside Orlando, Florida. Mid-morning temperatures approached 78 degrees as crowds filled the pathways during spring break season. The attraction towered above surrounding rides, its red and white track visible throughout the park. Theron Vasquez, 19, was finishing his freshman year at a state university, studying business administration and pledging a fraternity known for high-profile social events. Standing 5'10" and weighing 160 pounds, he had traveled to Florida with 6 fraternity brothers for spring break. Friends described him as eager to gain approval from older members and often willing to take risks to fit in. The group arrived at the park shortly after opening and headed first to a roller coaster featuring multiple inversions and speeds exceeding 65 miles per hour. Theron boarded a middle car with 3 fraternity members, securing his phone before a ride attendant checked his restraint. The ride ended without incident around 10:40 a.m., but while exiting, Theron realized his phone was missing. After searching unsuccessfully, an older fraternity member suggested it had likely fallen onto the track and was probably destroyed, advising him to check lost and found later. Others mocked him for losing the expensive device. Although he initially left with the group, Theron became increasingly upset as they discussed the loss. Near a merchandise stand, he separated from them and returned toward the roller coaster's exit pathway. Instead of re-entering the station, he approached a restricted gate beside the ride, marked with warnings prohibiting entry and cautioning against moving vehicles. Witnesses later reported seeing Theron climb over a 4-foot chain link fence that separated the public walkway from the ride's maintenance area. He dropped down into a landscaped section beneath the track structure and began scanning the ground near one of the ride's support columns. The area was clearly visible from the queue line, and multiple guests noticed him moving through the restricted zone. Several shouted warnings, but he did not respond. The roller coaster operated on a computerized dispatch system that released trains at timed intervals. Theron moved along the ground beneath the track, searching near support footings and landscaped beds. He eventually reached a section where the track swept low to the ground following a banked turn, passing just several feet above the surface before climbing into the next element. Guests in the queue line later described shouting and pointing as another train came through the turn at speed, but the noise made verbal warnings ineffective. Theron appeared to notice the approaching train and moved toward the perimeter fence. As he did, he stepped into the ride's clearance envelope, the three-dimensional space surrounding the track, designated for vehicle passage. The train's outer edge struck him at approximately 55 miles per hour as it swept through the low clearance turn. The collision threw his body approximately 30 feet, where it landed in a planter bed adjacent to the queue line. Ride sensors detected the impact immediately, triggering an automatic emergency stop that halted all trains on the circuit. Guests in the queue screamed, and park security reached the location within minutes. Theron was unresponsive with catastrophic injuries visible to witnesses before security personnel established barriers and cleared the area. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be massive blunt force trauma, with injuries including skull fractures, complete spinal cord transection, and extensive internal organ damage. Park surveillance footage reviewed by investigators confirmed Theron had entered the restricted area independently and without authorization. His fraternity brothers provided statements confirming his phone had been lost during the ride. The park later installed additional fencing and surveillance systems around the ride's perimeter, and warning announcements were added to the queue line addressing the dangers of track intrusion.
It was January 5th, 2019, and late morning sun burned through coastal haze over a water park in Santa Catarina State, southern Brazil. It was the height of summer season, and the park was at near capacity. Families and groups of friends spread across every attraction, towels draped over every available railing and lounge chair. Cássio Melquiades was 31 years old and worked as a police officer in a mid-sized city roughly 2 hours inland. It was his day off, and he'd driven to the coast that morning with his wife, her sister, and his brother-in-law, Renato, a regular summer tradition for the four of them. Cássio was fit and solidly built at roughly 210 pounds. Colleagues at the precinct later described him as competitive about everything. Card games at the station, weekend football, even who could find parking closest to the entrance. His wife said he kept a running tally of small victories in his head and brought them up unprompted at family dinners. We all know someone like that. That's what makes this one land so much more different for me. He and Renato had spent the morning on the same open-top body slide, a long, steep fiberglass chute with a high-banked curve halfway down, built in the early 1990s. They timed each run on their phones, comparing at the bottom, arguing over who had the better start. His wife and sister-in-law had given up watching after the fourth run and moved to the wave pool. The slide was designed for riders in a standard position, arms crossed over the chest, legs slightly apart for natural drag. Cássio lost the last 3 runs. Each time, Renato showed him the stopwatch at the bottom and grinned. 3 losses in a row, and if I know anything about competitive people from covering these stories, I knew he wasn't going to let that stand. Renato later told investigators that before the final run, Cássio told him he'd figured out where he was losing time. He was going to tuck his arms flat against his sides and cross his ankles, a streamlined position he'd never tried before. He also planted his feet on the start gate and pushed off harder than usual. New position, harder push, more speed. I want you to remember all 3 of those. Based on everything I was able to find, the slide's high-banked curve likely sat roughly 25 feet above a narrow concrete maintenance walkway running alongside the structure below. The outer wall on the curve stood roughly 4 feet high, adequate for average weight riders, in the standard braced position under designed speed. The slide predated current industry guidelines, which recommended higher walls on banked sections to account for heavier riders at greater speeds. Those guidelines had been published years earlier. The fix existed on paper and nobody built it. This is one of the parts that makes my blood boil. The park had not been retrofitted. Cássio entered the curve significantly faster than any previous run. His streamlined position eliminated the drag the slide's design relied on to regulate speed through the bank. His 210-pound frame pushed him higher up the curved wall than intended. At the apex of the bank, his shoulders crested the top of the 4-foot wall. His momentum carried his upper body over the edge. His hips followed, and he went over. When I first read those words in the report, I just stared blankly at my screen for the next 30 minutes. A park employee on the walkway below later told investigators she heard a shout above her, looked up, and saw a body tumbling off the edge of the slide. She said it happened so fast she didn't process what she was seeing until he hit the ground. Casio struck the concrete walkway roughly 25 feet below the curve's outer lip. The employee radioed for help immediately. Emergency responders reached the walkway within minutes. Casio was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at a regional hospital. The medical examiner determined catastrophic cranial fractures and cervical spine dislocation from a high-altitude fall onto a hard surface. The park closed the slide immediately. Engineering review found the wall height fell below updated guidelines the park had never implemented. The slide was permanently decommissioned. Renato deleted the timing videos from his phone and declined to speak publicly. He deleted every video and never spoke about it again, and I think we all understand why.
It was July 16, 2016, in Napa Valley, California. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting golden light across the vineyards. An outdoor wedding reception was being held at a vineyard estate with approximately 140 guests in attendance. Valerie Hutchins, 38, was a real estate agent from San Francisco who specialized in luxury properties. She was known for walking out of listings that didn't meet her standards and had been asked to leave several open houses after making loud criticisms about staging choices. Friends who knew her well had learned to avoid inviting her to casual gatherings, as she had a habit of pointing out what she considered tacky decor or subpar catering. She had flown in specifically for this wedding and had complained about the parking situation and the lack of valet service. She also made pointed observations about what she considered poor planning, from the mismatched chair covers to the amateur floral arrangements. She had been drinking wine steadily since the cocktail hour began at 6 p.m., growing louder with each glass. Valerie wore a cocktail dress and heeled sandals. Her hands were damp from condensation on her wine glass and the humid evening air. She had no technical knowledge of generators or electrical systems. Approximately 10 minutes after confronting the staff member, Valerie walked away from her table toward the generator location. Several guests noticed her heading in that direction but did not follow. She moved behind the lattice panels where the generator sat on a rubber mat. The generator was running at full capacity, with multiple heavy-duty extension cords connected to its outlets. The unit's metal frame was grounded, but investigators later noted damage to the protective casing near the connection panel had exposed a live electrical point. Valerie gripped the generator's metal frame with both hands, attempting to drag or push it away from the seating area. The unit weighed approximately 200 pounds and did not move. She adjusted her grip, placing her right hand on the frame and her left hand near the electrical panel where the cords were connected. Her left hand made contact with an exposed terminal where the protective casing had cracked. The generator was actively supplying electrical power through its outlets. Investigators later determined she made contact with an exposed live connection, allowing current to pass through her body while her other hand remained on the metal frame. The electrical current caused immediate involuntary muscle contractions. Valerie's hands clenched tighter around the contact points, preventing her from releasing her grip. Her body went rigid, and she remained in contact with the generator for several seconds before collapsing backward onto the ground. A guest walking toward the restroom area saw Valerie fall and called out for help. Valerie was lying on her back, unresponsive and not breathing. Her hands showed visible burn marks. Guests immediately called emergency services while others began CPR, and the generator was shut off within about 90 seconds. Responders arrived 9 minutes later and continued resuscitation efforts, but Valerie never regained consciousness or a pulse. She was transported to a medical facility and pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The cause of death was cardiac arrest from electrical shock, with burn marks on both hands confirming sustained contact with a live electrical source. Investigators later determined a recently damaged casing had exposed energized components while the generator was running. The death was ruled accidental, and civil liability claims against the venue were eventually settled privately.